the return of the sausages.
All sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have, right? Famously, Sky TV.
How'd that happen? I guess I just forgot what was going on.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats.
Yay, it worked.
Hello, and thanks for joining me, Jim Hancock, the political editor of Downtown Media, and Jo Phillips, former comms chief to Liberal Democrat leader Paddy Ashdown, and now busy as a political commentator, including GB News, where her clashes every Tuesday evening with Nigel Farage are very, very watchable indeed. No Frank McKenna today, but we have a very big agenda. Jo and I actually were in Westminster yesterday at a very successful downtown event with the West Midlands Combined Authority. Met some lovely Brummies and it was a fantastic day. But being in Westminster, I think Jo will agree with me, we couldn't but be aware of the febrile atmosphere that there is about the future of the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, after the debacles over Angela Rayner and then Peter Mandelson, which continues. We'll be discussing that and the problems for the Conservatives with the defection of now a sitting front bencher, Danny Kruger, to reform. Into all that tonight comes the Donald. The state visit by the American president will be very interesting indeed. It'll be interesting to see whether the royal visit will be, and the love of pageantry it has, will be overshadowed by a press conference which is due to be held on Thursday, as far as I know, where the questions will be about Epstein, not the economy. So lots to discuss, Jo. What was your impression of the Starmer thing from our time in Westminster yesterday?
I think people are very anxious. I mean, a few Labour people that I spoke to are thoroughly fed up. And I think the general sense is that, everybody was so hopeful. We know it was a big but shallow landslide last year when Labour won the election. But all the missteps and the misfortunes have been self-inflicted. And I think that's what's really annoying people. We had the winter fuel allowance completely out of the blue. We've had a budget that has, not done what it's supposed to do. We've seen very big pharmaceutical companies only this week not going to invest in the UK because of our insistence on drug pricing. I mean, that is not entirely the government's fault, but it's also to do with Trump and tariffs and all of that stuff. We've got the ongoing problem of asylum seekers and immigration, which is, pushing reform up the polls. And we've got, the loss of Louise Haigh as Transport Secretary. We've got the loss of Tulip Sadiq as anti-corruption minister on corruption charges. We've got the very big loss to Keir Starmer of Angela Rayner as Deputy Prime Minister and Deputy Leader. And now, of course, we've got the Peter Mandelson, who Starmer was forced to sack as our ambassador to Washington, following yet more revelations about the depths of depravity, one would say, in his relationship and his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. So nothing is going well for Starmer at all. There is a feeling, and of course you've got the deputy leadership race going on at the moment between Lucy Powell and Bridget Phillipson. You've got Labour conference coming up next week. Whether anything can be pulled out of the Donald visit, I don't know. I think that won't have much impact on ordinary people in the dog and duck, to be perfectly honest. So I think things are pretty grim. Yes.
Obviously, the issue about the Donald Trump's visit, we can come on to later. But just to focus on Starmer for the moment, the word that one was hearing around Westminster yesterday was that obviously the conference speech is going to be in many ways critical. I sometimes think these conference speeches are overrated, but in terms of setting the tone now, it will be very important. And we're being briefed that Starmer's going to make it absolutely clear what the purpose of the government is, because that's the sort of the overarching question. He's not been able to, although some, they would say some good things have been done on the health service and breakfast clubs and things like that, and big order for the Navy. That the overall message is not coherent, and that's what Starmer's got to do at the party conference. But I suppose we come down to it does come down to personality, because people just can't be different from what they are. I mean, Keir Starmer is what he is. Some of us, and me included, were grateful to see a stable, slightly dull lawyer in charge rather than that buffoon Johnson. But the sort of stability has led to a sort of inertia or a lack of direction, taking bad advice. And so he really has got to turn it around fairly quickly. The question is whether it's already gone too far. And I mentioned that because yet another scandal came out late last night, where a top Downing Street aide had to resign because disobliging emails from 10 years ago were turned up that he'd said about Diane Abbott, the mother of the House of Commons. And the significance for me, Joe, in that, I don't know if you agree, was that who's leaked this? And is this a sign that things really are falling apart, and that he's going to struggle, even with an excellent conference speech, to turn things around?
Well, when you're not here and Frank's not here, I quite often do the podcast with Kevin, who is Mr. Birmingham and who was at the event yesterday. And Kevin and I, like you, Jim, do bits of media training and comms advice to various people. And one of the things that we said, it's just so rule number one. What have you got in the cupboard that might embarrass you? And always assume that everything you say or do is going to be, either recorded or photographed or hoarded up by someone who's got a grudge against you at some point. Nothing in life is private anymore. Now, there are two ways of looking at that, because one is that's why people quite understandably don't want to go into politics or public life, because they want to have some sort of private life, and they think, actually, this is off limits. It's my family. It's my, bad hair day, whatever it is. So there's all of that to one side, but there is an element of where is your common sense? And this is the whole thing about the sort of the social media and what you put on WhatsApp. If you wouldn't say it to somebody's face, then don't put it on social media. It will come back to bite you. And I don't know whether that was, as you say, somebody leaking it. But, Starmer went into government knowing full well he'd got a very hostile press. He'd got a very slim majority. He's now got reform breathing down his neck, but we'll come on to reform in a minute. But I think, there's a sense of how can you make so many bad decisions when you are so cautious that you've taken unbelievable gambles, with Peter Mandelson, who, it is said, he was broadly advised not to put in that position into Washington as Britain's ambassador. So why do that? Why put Louise Hay in a position of seniority in the cabinet when he knew that she had got a previous conviction for fraud, which he knew about? Why put it there so that it might come out and damage the government? And the reshuffle, although I think when we talked about it a bit last week, some of it has been very good and very sensible. He's still got the problem about who's going to be the deputy leader, who actually, in terms of the party, is much more important than deputy prime minister, which of course has already gone to David Lammy. And you can't blame the Tories for Mandelson, for Rayner, for all the other things. You can't keep blaming your members of staff when you are the person that's appointed them. First of all, it was Sue Gray. Well, she got short shrift and went up to the House of Lords. Now we hear it's all Morgan McSweeney. Well, who appointed Morgan McSweeney? There is a big question for all this lawyerly caution and deliberation or dithering, depending which way you look at it. How can you make such appalling decisions?
Yeah, we'll come back to the internal machinations of the Labour Party in just a moment. But let's just say that, of course, perhaps some of these things, I think a lot of them are quite spectacular and would have overwhelmed it. But some of these things would be easier to handle if there had been some sign of the economy turning round and people really feeling better off in their pockets. And then the voters might be more sympathetic to Labour. So I've not noticed a Chancellor around during all this mayhem. She's keeping her head down. I presume she's preparing her budget. But, what she does and the growth that the government are looking for could still transform things and make all this internal party stuff, which, as you've already said, the average person doesn't follow in great detail. They just get an overall impression of it. You know, if they could get the economy moving, things might be better, but the headwinds are still there. Have you seen this report about a further increase in food prices coming along? And, you know, food prices have,
Well, and, you know, any fool can tell you, anybody who's even got, you know, a small bit of garden or an allotment, as I have, along with Jeremy Corbyn and Sir John Curtis, you know, the weather has been appalling for the last 12 months. So, you know, if you're growing not for fun, but actually to try and grow carrots or potatoes, it's been bloody awful.
They must be plumping up now with all this rain, Jo.
No, my tomatoes are lovely, but this is not gardener's question time. Otherwise, we get ticked off by Frank when he comes back. But, you know, if you look at the harvest, for instance, wheat yields are 30% down this year because we've had such a long period of drought. Well, that will have an impact on bread and flour. The cost to farmers having to feed their livestock with hay because there hasn't been any grass will come on to the cost of meat. So, yes, food prices are going to go up. Electricity and gas prices, we know, are going up or not going down for sure. And we also know that the impact of the employers' national insurance levy that increase that Rachel Reeves imposed in the spring budget has had a very detrimental effect on smaller businesses who have been very reluctant to take people on. So we've got not a very healthy economy. I know a couple of weeks ago we were talking about, we were the fastest growing economy in the G7, you know, at 0.7%, which you'd need a magnifying glass to see. But nevertheless, you know, it's the direction of travel. But that direction of travel seems to have stalled. And I do think, you know, these sort of big deals that look like they're going to happen and then don't, like the pharmaceutical ones that I mentioned, that's a really big blow, because life sciences is a huge investment opportunity for this country, you know, in terms of jobs and investment, and therefore for productivity. And we've still got, you know, huge problems with councils are cutting like mad. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday who, you know, she's a teaching assistant. Well, she's being laid off. You know, they've only just gone back for the new school term and they're cutting teaching assistant posts. So, you know, there are cuts across the board. People are seeing their kids can't get on the housing ladder. Rents are really expensive. Transport is going up. And there's an awful lot of people still on benefit. There's lots and lots of kids who are not working, who aren't in education. You've got everybody, you know, from universities to businesses saying we can't cope with this. And I think you're absolutely right, Jim. You know, where is Rachel? Because she sure as hell needs to pull something out of her hat come the budget.
Yeah. Well, one of the guests at the because we had this downtown event at Westminster yesterday for the West Midlands Combined Authority, was one of our friends from Forenza, the excellent restaurant chain, and he was, you know, he'd sort of, I thought he was rather more tolerant of the sort of increases that he's had to suffer at the hands of the Chancellor, but he certainly said, don't come after the hospitality industry again. So we'll have to see where she turns. Of course, she's got an important speech to make. She's usually done on the Monday of the Labour Party conference. So we'll see what she has to say. But let's just turn back to the Labour Party's internal matters, because obviously the resignation of Angela Rayner did have consequences, including triggering this deputy leadership contest. And we have the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, and the Manchester Central MP, Lucy Powell. Now, I mean, my take on it is that that Bridget Phillipson is Starmer's choice for this position, and Lucy Powell is, you know, obviously fed up with being sacked from the government, but that she's possibly to the left of it and might even be working alongside Andy Burnham, which is another intriguing situation. So do you think? I mean, it's not as stark as if one of the hard left candidates had been chosen, but what do you see as the dynamics in this Labour deputy leadership election?
Well, I think it's hard to tell, really, because I think, you know, Bridget Phillipson, because she's in the cabinet, would have had to get permission to stand in the first place. So therefore, she has implicitly got Starmer's blessing. So many people will see her as a loyalist. I mean, I don't know whether you saw, but people were talking about it yesterday in Westminster. The extremely lovely photo shoot she did for the Sunday Times Style magazine, where she looks absolutely stunning. She's wearing beautiful clothes, fabulous makeup, fabulous hair. Now, you and I know, Jim, because we're old hacks, that those magazines are put to bed, go to print, many, many weeks before they actually hit the newsagent stands. So nobody would have imagined at that time that there would Bridget Phillipson trying to be, deputy leader of the Labour Party. I'm personally not sure about those sort of glamorous photo shoots, because even if she hadn't been going for the deputy leadership, you put that in a glossy magazine just as the kids go back to school. She's the education secretary, and there are an awful lot of teachers who are having to do an awful lot of stuff in schools because they haven't got the resources or the staff to cope. So I'm not sure that somebody, looking like a film star, and there's nothing wrong with that, is the best use of a cabinet member's time, personally. But back to the substantive issue. Lucy is very popular. She's worked hard. She was Britain in Europe for a very, very long time. She's a good MP. And by all accounts, she was very good as leader of the Commons. And she did deal with all of those questions that constituency MPs need to raise about, the pedestrian crossing on Acacia Avenue, or the closure of the park at the Jim Hancock Memorial suite, or whatever it is.
Thanks.
And those are the, oh, sorry, I gave it away. But that
you're already making preparations.
Yeah, well, you never.
I'll be sad and flattered at the same time.
But you could. Those are the things that allow constituency MPs to go back to their constituencies and their local media and say, look, I did raise this question and this was the answer I got. So in terms of managing, the party at a more local and arguably more important level for the people who voted for MPs, I think Lucy Powell, as far as I can tell, has got a very good record. And I think it was rather peculiar that Keir Starmer sacked her. He didn't need to sack her. He could have left her in position. But as it is, he sort of shuffled people around. But, we saw the new business secretary yesterday, Peter Carl, who I think was probably quite pleased to be on terra firma, or as John Prescott famously said once, on terracotta when he got off a plane. Oh, it's great to be back on terracotta. But, Peter Carl, who has gone into the job only last week and has already been to Washington and China, and there he was yesterday at the downtown West Midlands event. There's an awful lot of work to do, but it's like white noise, Jim, and that's the problem. And we've got into this very febrile atmosphere, not just in this country, in America particularly, but also across Europe as well, where it's actually, can you make a loud noise? Can you make people look up? Because all the time you make speeches that sound as though they've been written by committee, and you talk about visions and strategies and stuff like that, people go to sleep. There was a young man yesterday, Jim.
Yeah.
His name, I think, was Bradley, who is a poet, I think.
Oh, yes.
Who is just brilliant. And I don't know any more about him, but he just electrified the room with a paean of poetry, if you like, a paean of prose to Birmingham and to the West Midlands. And you just think, right, that's what you need to do. Bottle it. Stop talking about strategic growth and delivery and actually speak human.
Yeah, I think he could well be a sort of, in a poetical sense, a successor to the late Ozzy Osbourne. He had that sort of slightly self-deprecating, brummy, and he was that. Yeah, just on this reshuffle again. The commentators are sort of saying that and we'll come on to Andy Burnham now, whether Starmer took out Andy Burnham's allies, because Greater Manchester did suffer. We've already talked about Lucy Powell being sacked. There was Jim McMahon, who was the local government minister from Oldham, former Oldham council leader. He was sacked, rather ludicrous. And Johnny Reynolds, of course, was moved so that Peter Carl could get his job to being chief whip when he was doing a pretty good job at business. So there is this feeling that there is concern in number 10 about Andy Burnham and whether he's on manoeuvres. I think some of this is exaggerated, because the awkwardness that Andy Burnham would have to go through in order to be a candidate for leadership of the party are huge. First of all, he had made it repeatedly clear that he loves being in Greater Manchester, doing things, and at Westminster he was frustrated, and that's a place where nothing gets done, and he wanted nothing to do with it. So he's going to have to tell us why he's had a conversion. Then he would have to, and everybody thinks that the seat he would go for would be Denton and Gorton, where currently Andrew Gwynn sits as a suspended Labour MP over a series of texts, but no particular indication that Gwynn's going to stand down, but that might be the case. But Farage has already thrown down the gauntlet, warning him that it'll be a ferociously fought by-election. And I do think Burnham would emerge because he is immensely popular in Greater Manchester. But, you know, it would be an absolutely fascinating by-election, which I think would be quite close with a Burnham victory. Then Burnham gets back to Westminster. If Starmer's still there, is he hanging around? Is he trouble on the back benches? Then he's got to get 80 nominations to challenge Starmer, as I understand it. Technically, the position of the leader of the Labour Party is up every year. So I'm sure you'll agree with me that this easy talk about Andy Burnham becoming Prime Minister is fraught with procedural issues, isn't it?
Oh, completely. And, you know, I think the timing is everything. You know, if Andy Burnham is going to stay in position as he's promised to till 2028, well, it's too late for the next general election, probably. There's also the huge risk that actually, even if he did take on the Gorton seat, and I understand that sitting MP has asked for leave to retire on grounds of ill health, that even if he got that, if he lost the by-election, he's then lost the mayoralty of Greater Manchester and that position of power and influence, and he looks like a failure. And, you know, Reform would be crowing even more than they do already. I mean, the other person that nobody's mentioned, of course, is Wes Streeting, who has always been seen by many people in the Labour Party as the possible successor, or possibly should have been instead of Keir Starmer. I don't know. I think we will know more next week, Jim, from the party conference and see what the mood is there. You know, one thing is for sure, you've got Jeremy Corbyn taking off an awful lot of people of the very left of the Labour Party. You've got the new leader of the Greens, who will also appeal to that very left base. You've got, you know, the big international issues like Gaza and Trump, plus all the domestic things. So politics is so fractured. You know, if Keir Starmer can pull it round, if Shabana Mahmood can really make a difference as the new Home Secretary, and if, as you say, the economy starts to show improvement that people can feel instead of it's just figures on a graph, then, you know, fortunes might change. But as we know in politics, anything could happen. Yeah.
The Labour conference starts at the end of next week, Saturday, Sunday, the 27th, 28th of September. So it's a little way away. Let's turn to the Conservatives because, you know, I mean, and this is the unusual state of British politics, that people have lost faith in both the main parties, and that's what's allowing Reform to surge ahead. What's your estimate of the defection of this latest Danny Kruger? You know, a man who's been on the right of the party, but made pretty disobliging remarks about Reform not long ago. And I'm picking up some unease amongst Reform members that they don't just want to turn into a sort of dumping ground for disaffected Conservatives, and people who are beginning to think, and this is a real worry for the Conservatives, possibly, that it is the default thing to do, that the scales have tipped so far in Reform's favour that to remain a Conservative means that you'll lose your seat, and therefore we could almost see a landslide of candidates. But, you know, would Reform be sort of diluted? Because one of Reform's big things is we're not like the others. You've lost faith in the other parties. We're new. But rapidly, with Nadine Dorries and Danny Kruger and Jake Berry and so on, it's the same gang again.
Yeah, here we are. We're back again. We've got a different lead singer. And I think that is the problem. I mean, I do think Danny Kruger is an important defection. He's very serious. He's been around a long time. He was a speechwriter for Cameron, then he worked for Johnson. He was actually a shadow minister So, it's a significant thing, front bench spokesperson, and as you say, very, very damning. And I'm not sure that, last week I thought, well, Nigel, if you carry on like this, you're going to have to start wearing the Nurse Ratched uniform, because taking on Nadine Dorries, it's rapidly looking like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Now, Danny Kruger, to a certain extent, actually dilutes the Reform Party is looking like a receptacle for completely bonkers people. But as you absolutely say, if it is just going to be for Conservatives who think they can hang on to their seat because they've got Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch, well, where's the appeal in that to the voters who roundly rejected them last time? I mean, just because you put on turquoise instead of navy blue doesn't make you more electable. And I think, I know from hearing and reading the interviews with Danny Kruger's constituency chair, they are mightily fed up. He told them 15 minutes before he did the press conference. Now, frankly, that's rude. It's rude, it's unforgivable, because there will be people in his constituency who would have been working for him. And I think, I am not in favour in wasting money on by-elections, but I do think when the public have voted only a year ago, they voted for somebody who they thought was a Conservative, who's now decided not to be. I do think it throws questions. But, he's a good catch for reform. There's no doubt. We'll have to wait and see. But, the Tories, there still are decent Tories within the Tory party. They've got a crap leader and they've got an appalling record. And until they sort of own up to that and get themselves back into position of what they want to be, because clearly if half of them who want to hang on to their seats think they've got more chance of doing it through reform, there's no point in the Conservative Party going further to the right. They would be better off to actually try and go back towards the centre ground of that sort of one nation Tory and say, no, actually, we're here, we're sensible, we got it wrong, we made some appalling decisions over leaders, we lied to you through our teeth through Boris Johnson, and we gave you Liz Truss, and we're really, really sorry. But, actually, in our heart, we are not there to listen to lectures from Elon Musk or to do the bidding of Donald Trump. And I think this is quite an interesting thing, and we'll come on to this in the second half when we talk about Trump. I don't think the British public like Donald Trump as much as Reform does.
Yeah. Well, just one or two things to pick up from what you've said there. I do think, actually, this business about the Conservatives need to apologise and they need to own up to what they did. I do think, in fairness, they have done that, Joe. I've repeatedly heard, front benches. I heard my hero hit Mel Stride on today this morning.
I thought of you with him. Yeah.
Yeah. I think they probably have done that. The criticism of Kruger yesterday was that Kemi Badenoch hasn't done anything adventurous or radical, put anything on the agenda to say this is why you should vote for the Conservatives. He seems to be railing against what he regards as a rather bland first year for Kemi Badenoch. And of course, she would say that she's planning things in a methodical way and the policies will follow. But he seems to have got very irritated with that. And just the other thing is this business about you should resign and stand in a by-election. I mean, this has gone down the ages. Every time there's been a defection from any political party, you should stand in a by-election. I mean, there's a lot of merit in it, but it very rarely happens.
I know, and there are very good reasons why it doesn't happen, because of the cost to the public purse is one. But there's also the sort of, shrugging your shoulders of people go. I mean, our MP here resigned less than 3 months after the election, after people had walked the streets, canvassed for her, raised money, people had given individual donations, it's totaling several £1,000s. And I think that's really rubbish. I think if you're going to do it that quickly, I agree with you. Having a by-election just because somebody crosses the floor, if you like, is probably a waste of money and a waste of time, and you would get a low turnout. But I think, all the time you've got.
No, but I'm not necessarily saying that. I mean,
the appetite.
I could take the purest view that you stand for a party. If you want to change parties, you submit yourself to the people again. I think I'm on that side of the argument, actually.
Yeah. No, well, that's what I feel. It's sort of like, actually, it's not a personal decision, matey. You stood on a platform, and if that your decision is that you can no longer represent the party, then you should stand down.
I mean, a thought crosses, but we must conclude this now and have a break. But a thought crosses my mind that actually Farage might even say to Danny Kruger, "Well, we're riding high. Let's actually do it, and let's get you confirmed as an MP." But I suppose he's got him on that side of the fence anyway now. Anyway, we will take a break now, and when we come back, we'll be previewing the arrival of the orange one and asking, is it all going to go swimmingly, or could it all turn into a disaster? Welcome back to this week's Downtown podcast. We're without Frank McKenna, but we do have Jo Phillips and me, Jim Hancock, and we're now going to look at the visit by the President of the United States to this country, the second state visit, highly controversial in many people's minds because, well, let's put it politely, his way of conducting the presidency of the United States offends many people. It inspires some, but it offends many. And the fact that he's coming here in these circumstances, when we've just had to sack our ambassador in Washington, has complicated the thing even further. My thoughts, Joe, are that obviously Starmer and Trump want this to be, first of all, on Wednesday, Trump soaking up all the pageantry with a lavish banquet, and nothing much really can go wrong on that particular day, because as Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, has said, because he's changed his mind and is not going, he was going to go originally, and then when he changed his mind and said he wasn't going to go, he's been challenged on that, and he said, well, I wouldn't have a chance to talk to President Trump during the state formalities. But then I'm intrigued by this. On Thursday, it's the more political day. And as I understand it, at the moment, there is slated to be a full-blown press conference. And surely this is the point where it could all go seriously wrong, because I imagine British and American journalists are going to want to raise the issue of Epstein. And you can see the tension, because this visit is going to be surrounded with major announcements. Some have already come out today about investment. And this is the argument that Starmer presents, which is that no one believes that Starmer and Trump have the same politics, but that by Starmer's, and we have to give him credit for this, because in the first part of the podcast we were talking about all his deficiencies on the domestic front. On the international front, he has gained more credit for steering this narrow course in order for Britain to get a lower level of tariffs and levels of cooperation with the Trump administration. But, if the press conference, is going to be all about Epstein and Mandelson, how are these two figures going to react to it? Because Trump could easily, go off the rails, and then the whole visit will be, this is what it'll be remembered for, and one just doesn't know. If he goes back to America thinking he's been scorched while he was here in the United Kingdom, that could have some sort of consequences, because he's a very sensitive man, and on his feelings, things like trade and tariffs and defense can all hang. So how do you think it's going to go?
I would imagine there's an awful lot of what Alex Ferguson said, squeaky bums. And a lot of people will be very pleased when Air Force One takes off and we can go, oh, thank God we got away with that one. First of all, it's in Windsor. Parliament's not sitting, so we don't have the awkward embarrassment of Trump addressing both houses, where an awful lot of MPs would just simply boycott it. And, arguably Windsor is easier for security. So he's going to Windsor Castle to see the King and Queen, and there's a state banquet, and then there's down to Chequers with the Prime Minister. I mean, you're absolutely right. There's the whole Epstein thing, which Trump is desperately trying to do anything to distance himself from, because, if you remember, in opposition, he was calling for all the papers to be made public and all the details to be made public. But now he's in the White House again. He's less keen on it. No, it's nothing to see here. So there's all of that going on. The other thing that I think is, and I alluded to it in the first half, is that I actually think the British public really don't like Donald Trump. I think they see him as shallow, vain, a bully, all of the things that we know he is. And I think because, although Trump and Elon Musk have had a spectacular falling out, the things that Elon Musk was saying when he addressed by video link the Tommy Robinson right-wing rally in London at the weekend, about, you need in Britain to have a dissolution of Parliament and overthrow this government. I mean, hang on a minute, who the hell do you think you are? You drugged up trillionaire trying to tell people in this country to overthrow a democratically elected government. That sort of thing, and the stuff that JD Vance, the vice president, has said previously about free speech, in a country where they are cracking down on anybody who happens to disagree with the MAGA message, is quite astonishing. So it may well be that there will be some probing questions from British journalists about that sort of thing. I'm not sure that the Epstein stuff is, I think the Mandelson thing in the British context is more important than Epstein himself, if you see what I mean. But Trump will be uncomfortable. I mean, don't forget when he came last time, Jim, he said that Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, was a stone cold loser. He's rude, he's vulgar, he's thoughtless. There might be questions about Gaza. We've had the UN report out today saying that, yes, Israel has committed genocide, and on every level that is calibrated. So, what's he doing about Gaza? What's he doing about Ukraine? It's a very difficult one for Keir Starmer. Yvette Cooper, the new foreign secretary, I wouldn't have thought is going to appeal to Trump, because I'd have thought she was the embodiment of the sort of middle-aged, middle-class, white liberal. She's a bit like Hillary Clinton. He won't have any sort of relationship, I wouldn't have thought. But if she takes Ed Balls along, there might be a bit of, jocularity or something to break the ice slightly. I don't know. What do we want out of it? I think Keir Starmer has done far better abroad than he has at home. And I think, in a way, it's a demonstration that, yes, the special relationship, for what it's worth, is still there, and Britain has done better out of the tariffs. But, he's so mercurial, and he's so likely to change his mind every 5 seconds. But if they can come to a deal, because also traveling with Trump is Sam Altman, ChatGPT, whatever it's called, and some other high-tech bros who are coming over here. So that might lead to something. But they do need to have some conversation about drug prices and this pharmaceutical thing, because that is a really, really big blow to the British economy.
Yes, just on that pharmaceutical thing, I don't want to get too far sidetracked, but I am interested by it. The British government's view is that they will not be ripped off by the pharmaceutical companies, that drug prices have got to be kept down. The pharmaceutical companies themselves always point, and I used to host conferences for an antimicrobial resistance organization, so I did study this a little bit, that the research into drugs is a painstaking one, and the failure rate is huge. So when they find a drug that works, they've got to profit from it. But it's a very sensitive area, because Wes Streeting, we all know the pressures on his budgets. So we have a reputation, rightly or wrongly, for not paying as much for our drugs as other countries, and that's why these AstraZeneca and Merck are going off. But
one of the reasons is because of Trump saying that he wants drug prices for American consumers to be lower. So actually, if we ended up paying more, we would in effect be subsidizing Americans to use drugs. And it's a question of whether that's worth it.
Yes. And that also goes for his aggressive policy on the tech companies, and he seems to want to let them rip, and we want to control it. But we'll see. But just reflecting on this thing, because if the British public, and I think you're probably right, don't like Trump very much, what do they make of Starmer? If you want to be unkind, the incident when he was in Washington and the papers blew all over the place, and Starmer was on the floor scrabbling around picking up the papers at Trump's feet, sort of symbolized the anxiety that some people have that a Labour government, particularly a Labour government, is sort of debasing itself at the court of this egotistical guy. I don't know where the British people's judgment falls. Are we overdoing the sort of praise of Trump, or are we being pragmatic and trying to keep jobs in this country, and we have to do what we have to do with whoever is in the White House?
Well, yes, and I think that the truth of the matter is both of those things, or all of those things, are true. I mean, I personally find it nauseating to see the kowtowing and the flattery and all of that sort of stuff. It's you want to scream "Emperor's new clothes," don't you? But pragmatically and sensibly, we need to have a relationship with America, not least of all until we've got America and Europe and European defence a little bit beefed up. I mean, if you think this week, if we were having this conversation, Jim, and we were sitting in Poland or Romania, we would be having a very different conversation. And I think we should not underestimate how close we are and how near we are, not necessarily to a full-scale war, but we are on a very, very, very thin bit of ice. And it would only take one misstep. I think the problem with Trump is that you see Starmer, in effect, picking up the papers, which you could also argue with somebody being polite and helpful, and it was a normal thing that anybody would do. But you see him behave like that, and you see all of those European leaders and Mark Rutte go to Washington, and you're wonderful, Mr. President. 2 minutes later, he's laying out the red carpet for Vladimir Putin, who, within hours of leaving, bombs Ukraine. He's entertaining Netanyahu in the White House, and then coming to Turnberry going, "Oh yeah, it's awful, his children are dying." So the problem is with Trump is it's like trying to nail jelly to a wall. You don't know where you are with him. So the safest way to play it is to flatter, I suppose, and try and get something, in writing or something signed up that gives you some sort of security. But it is very difficult. And there are many people who think it shouldn't have happened. But, Trump loves a spectacle. He's not interested in the detail, actually. He's going to talk about how lovely the gardens are at Windsor Castle, or, how much he loved the Queen. And isn't Camilla gorgeous? And, and he's got a bit of a thing for Lady Victoria Starmer. I don't know why, poor woman, what she's done to deserve that. But, he's so shallow that it's all about show. And if they manage it quite well, they'll have a few questions, and then everybody can say this is marvellous, and he can go home and we don't have to do it again.
Yeah, what worries me is the sort of the debasement of politics, because, state visits, lavish banquets, and then you see the terrible traumas in Gaza and Ukraine, and, this birthday book that Mandelson was sending greetings. One absolutely despairs of what the public think about people in public life. I mean, obviously, we reiterate that the vast majority of politicians and statesmen and civil servants behave properly, but this successive dripping of all this decadence, if you like, set aside from the world's massive problems at the moment, it leads to a sort of cynicism in people that I think is quite dangerous. They just turn off from the whole thing. But of course, if you don't participate in the political process, then there's always somebody who will. So I'm generally worried about the debasement of standards at the moment.
Well, yeah, I think you're right, but I think people are so fed up with politicians in general, and that's the most dangerous bit, because that's where the populists fill the gap, and that's where you do end up with, whether it's Elon Musk or whether it's Charlie Kirk, who was assassinated in America last week, or whether it's Nigel Farage or Tommy Robinson or whoever it is. There are people who will find the voice that so many politicians are lacking, that connects with people. And there will be many people, quite rightly, who will say, we are spending billions on security. And I'm sure if you live in Windsor, it's extremely annoying because you probably can't get to Waitrose for the next 5 years. While we've got so many things that need, but 'twas ever thus, Jim. You could have said it about any number of people that the poor late Queen had to entertain, or the visits, to the Commonwealth and around the world. it goes, it's, you know, it's part of soft power. And I think, you know, with the absence of a full-time ambassador in America, then actually this sort of soft power, it helps, doesn't it?
Yeah, and the other pernicious thing, of course, is that the way this, social media works is the more extreme your views, the more clicks you get. Therefore, there's more advertising revenue generated. You couldn't think of a more pernicious, vicious circle going on. So I want to just give a moment to a person who tries to be firm, but a man of integrity, and speak softly, but won't get the clicks. And that's Ed Davey, who isn't going to this dinner. He's asked that those that will have access to the president take quite a tough line on Trump's stance on things like Gaza and and tech companies. There's some sort of rumblings about Ed not. If the Conservatives and Labour are losing popularity and we say reforms rushing into the gap, well, they're saying, well, the Lib Dems should be rushing into the gap. I do think he's doing his best, but he's determined not to enter this bun fight. I mean, there was he replied to Musk yesterday with a what's it called, sponge SquarePants emoji. It was done by the office to take the mickey out of him. And I saw Ed Davey on Newsnight last night saying, humour is sometimes the best way to deal with people like Musk. So Ed Davey's trying to, get some sort of profile, but it is very difficult for the Lib Dems, isn't it?
Well, it is. But, he's in quite a good position. They've got 72 MPs. That's huge. That's what, when I was working with Paddy Ashton all those centuries ago, we could have only dreamt of. There are hundreds and hundreds of local councillors. They've got MPs sitting on select committees, which, as you and I know, is actually where you can wield a lot of influence and have a lot of input. And I think Ed he's not exciting, but he is a decent man. They have laid out their stall very, very clearly on social care, which neither the Tories nor Labour have even mentioned. They've laid out their stall, not that it needed laying out. They've made no secret of the fact that they want better, closer relationships, if not full reintegration with Europe. Well, that's fine, because people who vote Liberal Democrat aren't going to go, oh, I voted for Leave. Unlikely. And they've been absolutely leading the field on the campaign against sewage in our rivers and seas. So they've picked on three really clear issues where you know exactly where you stand. They're not going to flip-flop on them. And I think, there are several things that in this terrible febrile world, I think the fact that Ed Davey thought of Angela Rayner and how it was for her with a disabled child from his own experience, and bothered to say it before condemning her for what she may or may not have done about her. I think he just comes across as human. And then will come a time, I hope, when actually people go, you know what, I want somebody who is not shouting, who's not screaming, who's not hating everybody whose skin is a different colour, or who's somebody that they've never seen in the neighbourhood before. I want somebody that actually does move a little bit slower and actually listens. And we'll see. I mean, I suspect that even if the membership, the paid membership, is not huge, I think support for the Liberal Democrats, particularly where they're in local government, because they're good at local government. They do the boring stuff. They listen to people. They hold surgeries. They could do with a few more high-profile people. And, no one is going to replace Paddy or Charles Kennedy. Charles was not good on detail, but he had an awful lot of charisma and he was highly recognisable. But actually, they have come back from the disaster following the coalition. And they've come back to considerable strength. And I think it's quite interesting, Jim, whether or not people at the BBC are listening to what we say each week with Frank about the disproportionate coverage of reform. But I have noticed that there has been a little bit more coverage of the Lib Dems recently. And one would like to think that we need, yes, I know, I've seen that. For those of you listening at home who can't see this, Jim is now holding up a paper saying that the left think that the BBC is biased towards reform. Well,
No,
that
the
came
left
up-
think the BBC is biased towards reform. What planet are they on, says Michael Deacon in the Daily Telegraph. And he puts the counter argument. Anyway, there we are.
Yeah, well, anyway, but the point I was making was not actually about reform, but I have noticed that there has been a little bit more coverage of the Liberal Democrats, and that's a good thing.
Just finally coming back to Trump again, and I mean, obviously, the death of anybody diminishes it all, and it was awful the way Charlie Kirk was assassinated. But for Trump to put out, well, there are two things. What Trump's reaction to it, which deeply disturbed me. One was that he almost was inciting a reaction, almost a violent reaction to it, which is not the way in which we should go. But just to put out something saying this violent language is being, is to be deplored, and without any hint of irony at all.
Yeah, I know. It's astonishing. Pots and kettles. And here was a man who went out and said it was dreadful, as though it was the assassination of Martin Luther King all over again, and didn't even mention the Minnesota lawmaker and her husband who were gunned down in their own home. And two other people on that same night in Minnesota or the attack on Nancy Pelosi and her husband. I mean, that was an opportunity for Trump actually to look like a president, to do what any decent human being would have done and said, this is awful. Our thoughts are with the family. There's never a place for this. Obviously, we should do something about guns in this country, but not right now. We'll wait until there's another school shooting. And actually, what we need to do is to calm everything down. And what that bloke, who I'd never heard of until he was shot dead, but what he did apparently was to have conversations with people. Now, whether or not you agree with his views or not is neither here nor there. The fact was he wanted to engage, he wanted to debate. And Trump had the opportunity to say, okay, let's pour, oil on troubled waters. But what he did was poured oil on troubled waters and then threw a match on it. Yeah. I mean, he is just astonishing.
Yeah. I know. And my final thought would be, a penny for the private thoughts of King Charles, who will impeccably do his duty. But you just wonder what he privately will be thinking about this man as he sits beside him at the banquet.
Well, yes, I should imagine Camilla may have to pop out for a hip flask and a quick gasper.
Well, we shall now.
Is it true, Jim, that's where Frank is today? That he's polishing his tux because he's going.
Oh, maybe he's received an invitation. Yeah, who knows? Anyway, he'll be able to tell us when we return to our normal slot of recording, which is Monday morning next week, when we will be able to look back at the Lib Dem conference, which will be being held. So we will be able to see how Ed Davey's handling things, and also, of course, previewing the Labour Party conference, which will be absolutely vital. Jo, thank you so much for your time today. It was great to see you in person yesterday, and we'll join you again next week.
Goodbye.